2019, and the Carroll City Council meeting is now in session. Will everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please note the attendance. Councilman Haley's not here yet. I'm sure he'll be shortly. The next item on the agenda is the introduction of the new employee, Dale Potabom, street superintendent. And Randy, you want to take care of that, please, sir?
Sure, I will. I'd like to introduce to the mayor and council Dale Potabom. Dale started 2 weeks ago as street superintendent of the city. He comes to the city with extensive experience in construction and more recently in county secondary road experience, not Carroll County, but an adjacent county. So we're real happy to have Dale and appreciate his work.
Thanks, Dale. Appreciate it.
You've done a great job with snow removal so far.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is the consent agenda, which is approval of minutes from the April 8th and 15th meetings, approval of bills and claims. We have 4 licenses and permits. There's a new Class B permit, includes wine coolers with outdoor service and Sunday sales. Carroll County Softball Association. Renewal of a Class C beer permit with Sunday sales, Sparky's One Stop. Renewal of a Class E liquor license with carry-out beer, carry-out wine, and includes the native wine and Sunday sales. Walgreens number 10770. Renewal of a Class C beer permit with Sunday sales and Class B native wine permit, Riley 71 South. Do you have a question? Oh, and then I got firefighter resignation and appointment on there too, so.
I noticed on the bill that we spent over $7,000 on salt for last month. Is that, how much do we normally spend in a year?
It varies a lot by winter. What we have spent the last 3 years, this year, total expenditure, was about $35,000. And that refills, we refill all of our salt storage in the spring. We've been through times when we couldn't get salt. In fact, this year, we were delayed in getting a delivery of salt. So we were able to get ourselves through it, but then our orders all came in late, and so they ended up in this month's billing. But historically, for example, the last 3 years, last year we used about $28,000 worth, about 400 tons. And this year it was about 500, just over 500 tons. And the prior year in 16, it was about 350 ton, $26,000, something like that, in total. So it really varies. This year, it was a bad year all over. That's why we were delayed in our salt delivery, because other places were getting delivery. And if you look in that line item that we charge our salt to, we also purchased a tank load of brine, salt brine. Normally, we cooperate with the DOT cooperates with us to make brine for us, and then we pay them in salt. So part of the salt that we have delivered goes to the DOT for the amount of brine they make. Great deal for the city, wonderful cooperation with the state. This year, the state ran out of brine at their local shop, so we had to purchase, and that's the first year we've purchased for a long time. But it's, we'll continue that relationship with the state as long as we can, because it's a great deal for the city.
Any other questions? If not, I need a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved. Second.
There's a motion and a second. There's no further discussion. We'll go ahead and vote, please.
Dirks?
Yes.
Seaman?
Yes.
Haley?
Yes.
Fleshner?
Yes.
Base?
Yes.
Cox?
Yes.
Motion is approved.
The next item on the agenda is oral requests and communications from the audience for things that aren't on the agenda. Yes?
R.T. Schreck here on behalf of the Carroll American Legion. I wanted to come back and express our gratitude to the council and to thank them for their help on the city cemetery project. And I'm happy to inform you that the new flagpole is up. The new flag is up. We're lit now. We have the electricity out to the memorial area, both 110 and 220. We were able to solicit additional funds for the new PA system, so we're looking forward to a very good Memorial Day this year instead of what we had last year. So if the mayor is good enough to come back, at least the crowd can hear him. So thank you very much on behalf of the American Legion, and the project is complete. Thank you.
Thanks, RT, appreciate it, yeah. Anyone else? If not, we're gonna move to ordinances, and there are none this evening, so we are off then to resolutions. And our first resolution this evening is the 2019 Merchants Park Baseball Stadium lease. Bucko Baseball doing business as Carroll Merchants, and Jack, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight, there's 3 different action items that we have for you. First is a resolution allowing the baseball stadium lease agreement with Bucko Baseball. And then second is to allow alcohol at the Merchants game. And third is the request and approval of the Class B beer permit at Merchants Park Stadium. This year, they're planning on 19 games and an all-star game down there at the stadium. Last year, games very well attended again. No issues as far as the city. They do a great job of picking up after games, making sure things are in order before and after games. So very good cooperation with the Carroll Athletic Association. John Perrin is here if you have any specific questions regarding that. But again, this is something you've passed the last few years. It's nice to have the extra activity down at Merchants Baseball Stadium.
Ready for a fun season, John?
You bet. Need the weather.
When do you start?
When do you start? First game is May 31st.
So we have 19 games. Curious what we had last year.
We had 18 plus an all-star game. This year we'll have 19 plus an all-star game, plus at least 1 playoff game.
Okay.
Possibly more, so. Carroll's really become, as we had our meetings with Donnie and the league, which is now expanded to include Fort Dodge, the gypsum miners, if I had that right, from Fort Dodge. Carroll's become kind of the marquee of the league, so thank you to the city and the city council for the support, because a lot of that wouldn't happen without the cooperation from everybody, but it's definitely a group effort.
Your fan base is huge, you go to those
Yeah.
games,
Yeah, it jumped.
you go to some of the away games and there's hardly anybody at those games. Carroll always seems to be full, so. yeah.
Just want to keep going.
Any questions? Otherwise, I'll need a motion to approve the agreement with Bucko Baseball doing business as Carroll Merchants for the 2019 baseball season.
So moved. Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Go ahead and vote, please.
Seaman?
Yes.
Fleshner?
Yes.
Haley?
Yes.
Dirks?
Yes.
Cox?
Yes.
Base?
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Then I need a motion to allow the Carroll Athletic Association to sell and serve alcohol at Merchants Park Baseball Stadium for Carroll Merchants home baseball games during the 2019 season.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second. There's no other discussion. We'll go ahead and vote, please.
Cox?
Yes.
Dirks?
Yes.
Haley?
Yes.
Base?
Yes.
Fleshner?
Yes.
Seaman?
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Finally, we need a motion to approve a new Class B beer permit, 6-month, includes wine coolers and outdoor service, and Sunday sales for the Merchants Park,
So moved. Second.
or baseball. Yeah. There's a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Go ahead and vote, please.
Dirks?
Yes.
Cox?
Yes.
Seaman?
Yes.
Fleshner?
Yes.
Base?
Yes.
Haley?
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Good luck. Should have a good season. Our second item, it is 5:25, and we'll go ahead and open a public hearing on the 2019 Community Development Block Grant, Owner Occupied Housing Rehabilitation Grant. And Laura, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Do you want me to go ahead and kind of review these items?
Yes, if you'd like.
Okay, I will. Okay, so this is kind of our last step in this process of applying for our grant. I'm following the cue and the information that Carla's been sending to me of what we need to do. So on tonight's agenda is to hold the public hearing, which we're doing now. And this will allow for the public to make any comments about the project that we're doing. If you recall at the last council meeting, it was the council meeting on March 25th. Council approved to allocate $2,000 per project for 5 housing projects. Then tonight, there is a resolution in your packet to officially affirm that in a resolution form for the grant application. Then we also have, we took, I'm gonna call it bids or RFPs for technical services. If the grant is awarded, we would work with a company or a provider to do the technical work of the project. And we received two RFPs, one from Region 12 here in Carroll, and another one from Apex Companies LLC. And based upon the scoring criteria that we received from the CDBG grant, we were recommending to work with Region 12. They have quite a bit of experience in this type of work of doing this type of a grant, so we would recommend working with Region 12. So tonight, the motion would be to select Region 12. Upon a grant award, then there would be another action that would come back to officially approve a contract with them. The next item is an administrative plan that outlines the primary goal of what we're trying to do here with rehabbing these houses. It's the rules that we would have to follow upon a grant award. So tonight is to approve that plan. If the grant is awarded, then there would be another action that would come after the grant award to actually execute a contract with Region 12 to be the administrative side of this. Then there's a number of policies to be updated and other items, including to update our code of conduct, which you had received in your packet showing the red line of what would be updated from an example that we got from CDBG saying this is what we would want you to see. An equal opportunity policy statement, which is another update to what we currently have. And working with the police department, one of the things that the CDBG grant would want to see is that we have a policy, what they call it, non-excessive force by any city employee, namely the police department. And working with the police department and Brad, he recommended that we implement this new police policy for crowd management. He said this is something where some practices that they're already doing unwritten, and then this would get into written form. So he didn't have any problem with recommending this policy to be implemented. Then an implementation of a residential anti-displacement and relocation assistance plan. If a family would happen to need to be out of their home during the time of some rehab, that we would work with them and try to find them a home or a place to stay during that time. And that would be all part of the grant money that's available for the projects. And then finally is to authorize the mayor to sign our disclosure update report and the federal assurance's signature pages. We have Carla with Region 12 here to go through if you have any specific questions about any of the items, but we will need separate motions for each one of these.
The red thing on the manufactured homes, so anything built after 1976. What about campers? When someone throws a camper, takes the wheels off and puts it on permanent foundation. Would
There's
they
no
consider
campers
that?
in your target area, so I highly doubt they would approve a camper, even if it went there.
Just, sometimes they have them sitting in their backyards, and I'm just gonna throw that out there just in case somebody decided. I've seen the campers out, and they're in the yards.
And you know, the nice thing here is you're going after 5 projects, and we already have 4 of them fully verified and in our pocket, and we have a few alternates. So that camper person, we have to go through all of our
All the starts
approved
all over
people
again.
and all of our alternates before they could even try to state their case on why their camper is sitting on a permanent foundation.
Well, I know that some of those manufactured homes, they come in with trailer, but you also have the mobile homes. same type of thing. We do have, we had some mobile home parks, well, I guess there's still one out there.
Correct, and
You know.
technically by CDBG, a mobile home that has had its chassis removed and is sitting on a permanent foundation is considered a residential structure as long as they have the deed to the property.
Okay.
So no, usually in a mobile home park,
Park.
they're
Yeah,
renting.
They're renting that.
Now, a modular home that comes, in two halves and gets put together, they're always put on a permanent foundation, so
Right.
that would be, and they have the deed to the property.
Okay. I'm looking at manufactured home, and then I started to read the thing about towing hitch and running gear removed. I'm like, those modular homes will be like that, but they always take that stuff off. But then you got those mobile trailers, mobile homes, like, so, okay.
Correct.
All right. I just want to be clear on that one. Thanks.
Carla, when we're fixing up a place and we gotta replace the people to another location,
We will take care of that for you. And typically, they have two choices. We can put them, we have a $1,000 allowance that's included in each project's budget with the CDBG grant funds to relocate them in a hotel and cover any food expenses that they would save their receipts for. Many people will choose to stay with family, and if you are over the age of 62, you do have the opportunity to stay in your home during the renovations if you choose to. But we will take care of all of the homeowners that would, if they have to be relocated during the lead-based paint work.
So it's not an additional cost to the city at that point, it's already boiled into the project.
You have no further costs.
Any questions from the audience? This is a public hearing, so if there's anybody in the public with a question. If not, any other questions from council? It is 5:32, and we'll go ahead and close the public hearing. With that, I'll need a motion.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I have a question, a technical question, actually. Given the number of motions that we have coming, is it even possible for us to go to in favor and opposed instead of the individual roll call?
I think they all have to be roll call, because they're all resolutions.
I would suggest that, yeah.
Sorry, I know, I was thinking the same thing, but I'm looking at
Reading it
all the
through.
resolutions, and each one of those have to be separate.
Okay, thank you.
So, thank you. So the first one, I need a motion to approve the resolution for the matching funds.
So moved.
Second.
There is a motion and a second. Any other discussion? We'll go ahead and vote, please.
Base,
Yes.
Cots,
Yes.
Seaman,
Yes.
Haley,
Yes.
Fleshner,
Yes.
Dirks.
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Thank you. Second one is to make the motion to approve the technical services provider.
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any other discussion? We'll go ahead and vote, please.
Base,
Yes.
Haley,
Yes.
Seaman,
Yes.
Cots,
Yes.
Dirks,
Yes.
Fleshner.
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Thank you. And then we need a motion to approve the administrative plan.
So moved. Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any other discussion? If not, we'll go ahead and vote.
Dirks,
Yes.
Seaman,
Yes.
Haley,
Yes.
Fleshner,
Yes.
Cots,
Yes.
Base.
Yes.
Motion is approved.
We'll need a resolution to amend policy number 0106.
So moved.
Do you need a motion for each one of those six and
Let's
107?
do it, yeah, each one is separate, so I was gonna break those up. I got and here, and then up here I got the separates. First on, by Councilman Haley, on 106.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. If there's no other discussion, we'll go ahead and vote, please.
Haley,
Yes.
Dirks,
Yes.
Base,
Yes.
Cots,
Yes.
Fleshner,
Yes.
Seaman.
Yes.
Motion is approved.
And then we'll need a resolution amending policy number 107.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. No other discussion, we'll go ahead and vote, please.
Seaman,
Yes.
Dirks,
Yes.
Cots,
Yes.
Haley,
Yes.
Base,
Yes.
Fleshner.
Yes.
Motion is approved.
And finally, we need a resolution approving the new police policy for crowd management.
So moved.
There is a motion and a second. If there's no other discussion, we'll go ahead and vote, please.
Base?
Yes.
Dirks?
Yes.
Haley?
Yes.
Cots?
Yes.
Seaman?
Yes.
Fleshner?
Yes.
Motion is approved.
And then I need a motion to approve the residential anti-displacement and relocation assistance plan.
So moved.
Second?
There's a motion and a second. If there's no other discussion, we'll go ahead and vote, please.
Base?
Yes.
Haley?
Yes.
Fleshner?
Yes.
Cots?
Yes.
Seaman? Dirks?
Yes.
Motion is approved.
And then I need a motion to authorize the mayor to sign the applicant receipt disclosure update report.
Second.
A motion and a second. If there's no other discussion, we'll go ahead and vote, please.
Dirks?
Yes.
Fleshner?
Yes.
Haley?
Yes.
Seaman?
Yes.
Base?
Yes.
Cots?
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Finally, a motion to authorize the mayor to sign the federal assurances signature page.
So moved.
Second.
There is a motion and a second. If there's no other discussion, we'll go ahead and vote, please.
Cots?
Yes.
Fleshner?
Yes.
Seaman?
Yes.
Dirks?
Yes.
Haley?
Yes.
Base?
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Thank you. Thanks, Carla. Appreciate it. Our final resolution this evening is declaring an official intent under Treasury Regulation 1.150-2 to issue debt to reimburse the city of certain original expenditures paid in connection with a fire pumper truck and street resurfacing 2019 project. And Laura.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What he just read off is the long way of saying a reimbursement resolution, which we
Yeah.
probably have talked about before. But basically what it says is, when we put the budget together for fiscal '20, we had included a debt issuance that we were planning to issue sometime after July 1st of '19, our fiscal year '20. And for some public improvements that we're planning, namely the fire pumper truck and the 2019 street resurfacing project. Well, if you start those projects and start making expenditures prior to issuing the debt, we need to have a resolution in place basically stating that we're gonna reimburse ourselves for these expenditures that we had already made with tax exempt debt issuance, or GO bonds, or capital loan notes. So that's what this resolution says tonight, is we're intending to issue this tax exempt debt sometime in the near future to reimburse for expenditures that we're planning to make or have already made here shortly. I know the street resurfacing project is well underway, and we're gonna be making some construction expenditure reimbursements. Now, the engineering side of things, those are handled slightly differently, that those don't necessarily fall under this, but we can also include them under here, so it's fine. And then the fire pumper truck, I know they're planning on getting maybe a portion of it sometime this fall, the chassis, and then the remainder of getting it all wrapped up before the end of the fiscal year.
We have to pay for that chassis before they deliver it, correct?
Before we get the actual truck
Truck,
itself, yeah,
yeah.
once the chassis is delivered, yes, then we make
Then
a
we make
partial
a
payment, so
payment
to speak, on it, yes.
Until they have the components on it,
Mhm.
okay.
Yep,
So procedure, Laura, anything, if there's any other expenses that happen between now and when we issue debt, do we need to do this each time?
no, nope, this covers us.
So we're gonna issue the bonds after July 1st of this year?
Yeah, we don't have a specific date targeted, but it'll be sometime in the next fiscal year.
Well, the pumper truck was for next budget
I
season.
just wondered when we were gonna issue the deal bond.
Any other questions for Laura? If not, I need a motion to approve the intent under Treasury Regulation 1.150-2 to issue the debt to reimburse the city for the original expenditures paid in connection with the fire pumper truck and street resurfacing project 2019.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. If there's no other discussion, we'll go ahead and vote, please.
Haley?
Yes.
Seaman?
Yes.
Dirks?
Yes.
Fleshner?
Yes.
Cots?
Yes.
Base?
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Thank you. We will move to reports next. And our first item is the cemetery buildings improvement presentation. And Jack, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Several months ago, council took action for us to do some study work on the museum and the northern building of those three buildings up there. which currently is a restroom and then a storage area, of converting that into a more public restroom facility for weekends, similar to what our team was talking about, the Memorial Day weekend and those events. There's restrooms where people can go up and use. So we have not allocated any money for the work, but these studies, this preliminary information is what we've worked with Craig Erickson and Shive Hattery on. And he has come back with some examples. Things can be changed. I've met with the Historical Society and had some discussions and a few minor changes to what is being proposed. And I guess at this point I would answer any if you have any questions before Craig starts speaking, or we'll turn it over to Craig and go from there. All right.
All right.
Yeah, please, Craig, thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I apologize to you folks for up front, kind of some of the compromises in the room, as if you want to turn and be able to see the exhibit. So as Jack mentioned, we were asked to look at two different things in the cemetery. Number one was providing an accessible route and door to the chapel piece, and that's what you see here. This is actually a plan view. North would be to your left. This is illustrating the chapel building. And then, as you probably know, there's sort of an existing front door with a stoop and a step coming up, and kind of a more narrow door. And then on the back, there's a garage door that's been redone recently. There is currently a driveway to this storage building, and then this building, which Jack mentioned as a potential restroom, sort of sits off on its own. When we talk about accessibility to this kind of structure, there are really two aspects of it. Number one was, how do we get a doorway that you can get a wheelchair through and has proper openers, those kinds of things. As we looked at the front, because of the age of that stonework around there and the fact that door was too narrow, or is too narrow, it would require substantial demolition of the stone around it. We would also be dealing with ramping up to that and then needing to create a handicapped accessible stall here, which would have wiped out the two evergreen trees that are there. So in looking at this, we saw an opportunity to maybe simplify this a little bit and be able to leave the more historic front entrance and propose some modifications to this rear garage door entrance that allow that to be the accessible route or accessible entrance. Second piece, as I mentioned, is how do you park and get into the building, and that's where we thought this was an advantage, in that this side of the building is relatively flat over here, then you kind of transition and go around, and it goes down the hill a little bit, so it actually gets worse when we go that way. So we came up with a design idea where the door here would be retrofit to have a fixed side and a operable side that would meet handicapped accessible opening standards. Jack mentioned that the historic group society had asked if we could reuse the doors that have recently been redone there. I'll have to talk to our architects about that. My suspicion is that when you start getting into the very specific hardware you need for openers and mechanisms, that may be difficult to do that. Right now we've costed this as a new door system. So if we are in actuality able to retrofit the doors that are there, there would be a cost savings. But right now we kind of have the most conservative case covered. That door, however, could be built to look exactly like the doors that are there now. So it maintains sort of the historic integrity, it just operates in a different way, even if we do have to replace them. So, you know, to the person that goes by and doesn't know any different, you know, it's the same set of doors. And then we would do some repaving work here to create an accessible route. There are some standards there in terms of maximum slope and distances for any ramps. In this situation, we wouldn't need ramps. We would then convert the driveway in front of the shed there to the accessible stall and the access aisle that allows you to get around. Technically, they could go this way if they want to. It won't be accessible because there'll probably be a little steep run there, but that way it's accessible route. In talking with Jack, you know, this stall is likely to only be used fairly infrequently. If they do need to get access to the shed while that's happening, we still do have an 8-foot wide access aisle that you can get to. You just, in that instance, would not be able to back a truck up to it, but you know, the 98% of the time that that stall will be empty, it can still be used to access that, the storage building there. So this seemed to be the best option to preserve the integrity of the structure and most cost effectively provide access. You can see here we put together a cost estimate on that. Most of the costs, quite frankly, are in that paving removal and new paving to put everything to allowable grades. There's quite a bit of pavement removal and then replacement. You can see that we're somewhere between $19,000 and $22,000 on that, but that does include a $5,000 figure for the door work. If we can economize there by reusing the existing doors, there's a possibility that this could be less money. So that's really what's happening with that. Any questions about the chapel building before I talk about the restroom structure? Get it adequately explained? So then this is that little restroom structure. Once again, north is to my left. So in this instance, the chapel building would be right there, and this would be the driveway that we just talked about rebuilding. This is illustrating taking both sides of that building and rehabbing it into 2 individual unisex restrooms. I think we actually had this conversation last time I was in front of you. We were talking about Northeast Park. You know, in the park and rec world, and in fact in public buildings in general, the idea of sex-separated restrooms is becoming very difficult to work with because of all the non-binary gender issues, and in general, most cities, particularly in their parks, are just dealing with that by creating, you know, individual unisex restrooms, other than in like sports facilities where you have to gang them just based on economy of scale. So this is really the sort of the current practice. And like I said, in this building we could fit 2 of them. There'd be a little bit of paving, so you know, there'd be some work to rip out the old doors, put new doors in. Everything inside them would be redone, new electrical, new mechanical, basically new plumbing, with all accessible fixtures, water closets, sinks, partitions if needed. In a family, in a single restroom, you don't need the partitions, but if you wanted something like that to work for a family restroom, you could put a changing table right there, leave the partition. So there are some options there that you can have. So that's the 2 version. Jack actually asked me earlier about, you know, how many restrooms do you need in a cemetery, and that's a little bit of a difficult question to answer in that there probably aren't any standards. A lot of times the number of restrooms you need is based on occupancy factor. Once again, 99% of the time there's very few people in that cemetery other than at special events, and it really is not typical that you would build enough restrooms to deal with special event days. So 2 would be plenty, and if you're really just trying to serve the chapel on a day-to-day basis, you could probably get away with 1. Which would reduce the overall expense. You know, then rather than rehabbing both, this side could be used as storage, decommissioned. This side that faces the chapel and the larger one could be rehabbed into a single unisex family restroom that would deal with pretty much any situation you would need on a day-to-day basis, other than, you know, maximum occupancy at an event. So that's that, and...
Oh, Craig.
Yes,
just
please.
Back up, the restroom there on the left,
Mm-hmm.
would you need that partition door there?
No, technically not.
That one could probably go if it's just a single.
That could go away.
Okay.
Yep. So that's an option. If you choose to do that, that one could go away.
So like for people that are handicapped, and they need someone with them all the time, would keeping that partition there make a difference, or is that really not required?
Really not required. You know,
Okay.
the partitions really relate more to use as kind of a family restroom. If you want to have a separation, but you're going to have like people changing in there or whatever, sometimes you choose to put the partitions just because it makes it a little less awkward as a
Right.
family in there. But it's totally optional at that point if it's, you know, designed that way. So there's,
The door to get into the bathroom will have a lock on it.
yes, yeah, at that point, they're individually locked and signed that way. Signage is another issue, you know, we just kind of have gone around, there's some actions now through civil rights commissions in terms of even how you sign restrooms. A lot of times now, you know, what symbols you put on, the traditional, you know, woman in a skirt, man in pants kind of, you know, thing, you know.
Can we just put restroom?
You can just put family restroom on it and an accessible symbol and be done with it. So that's kind of where that's going. So lots of loaded little issues that you kind of need to be aware of as you're redoing some of these things. Any other questions you want to look at before we look at costs on this? So this is another one where there's a possibility of, you know, you can kind of decide how you want to deal with this. The demolition costs you see up above are about $3,500. The new work for both sides is about $35,000. If you add those two together, by not doing one, you aren't actually going to just split it in two because there are certain things like plumbing and electrical that you're going to have to do anyway. But you know, you can certainly decrease this by quite a bit. If you know the combined cost of that is $38,000, you know you're probably in the 20 to 25 to do just one side. Like I said, you know there's not a complete economy of scale there, in that if you come in to mess with those, you're going to be doing electrical, you're going to be doing plumbing anyway, and so it's not exactly half. But we could look at that for you. And then, you know, some contingency there, so we just expressed it as a range. When we're dealing with something like this where we haven't done actual plans for you, we had one of our architects come in and do an assessment and do enough diagrams so we could get a good understanding of what it is. That's why we kind of put it as a range. You really don't have construction documents yet. You've got our best guess based on other alternatives that we've seen. So, questions about that?
So that sheet that you have there, your bottom figure probable cost range, does that say 42,000 to 50,000?
Yeah, somewhere in there,
And
depending on
so
what.
that's both projects?
That's,
Okay, because
Well,
I didn't have the
that's-
other cost sheet from above.
this one is just for the rest, for both sides of the restrooms.
Okay,
Yeah.
'cause I was looking for the other cost sheet that you had up
The
above.
other
I
cost
don't think I have
sheet,
that
let
one.
me
We
get
didn't
to
have
that.
that.
We didn't have that, yeah.
Oh, you
that
didn't
one
have-
I didn't have that sheet, no.
Oh, we didn't get you that one? We will get that. So this one essentially is 22.5 is what we're talking about. And like I said, 5,000 of that relates to the door, and there might be some monies to be saved there depending on the choices to be made. And like I said, a lot of the cost here is in the pavement alterations that need to happen to provide an accessible parking stall and an accessible route. So that's the deal there.
Is there concrete work in that figuring that you have?
Yes, that's all in. That's concrete, some surface restoration, gets you everything. I think the only thing we didn't put in there was, we did put some money for lawn seeding in there to take care of anything that gets torn up, but we didn't include landscaping. We figured that would happen later. So,
Craig, would you explain exactly what are the components that is making you question whether we're able to use the door that we had specially made? It was expensive. As far
So-
as making it handicapped. And then one other question to backtrack. Did you say that one side would be stationary and then just one side would open?
So let's go in reverse. The second side could be fixed with pins, but it has to have a solid jamb that door would go into. So it could technically still be operable, but on a day-to-day basis, you would keep it, locked in that shut position. So you could still swing them both open and get access. So that's the deal. What's causing the uncertainty about being able to reuse those doors? There's very specific equipment for handicap door operability in terms of hinges, operators, locks, actuator buttons, those kinds of things. And so I just don't know, and that's outside of my realm of expertise, but the ability to retrofit an existing door with that kind of hardware, a lot of times is not necessarily even the most cost-effective way to do it, because, you know, if you could buy it from a manufacturer with all that stuff in it, we just buy it to look like the existing door, it may well be actually less costly than to take those doors, send them to somebody, and try to have them retrofit it with all those, the openers and all that kind of stuff. We can get, I can try to get, I took some photos, I can try to get a little bit more information from one of our architects, but I have a feeling that's the answer we're gonna get back. I've done enough of these things. But.
Yeah, okay, I noticed on the drawing, it's mentioning metal door.
We've actually, so Jack talked to me about that, actually, so we sent you this packet last week.
Yes.
And then Jack actually talked to me about that subsequently on Friday. I went and talked to architects, we can do a wood door, you know, to match the wood door that's there. What we did not talk about, and Jack and I maybe had a little miscommunication, I might have misunderstood him, was the idea of reusing the existing door. You know, so that's something we're gonna have to look into a little bit, but like I said, in my experience with these kinds of things, because of the specificity of the hardware and the operators and all those kinds of things, it's usually a little bit more difficult to reuse an existing door. And I think the big issue I had there, or was concerned about, was just the thickness of that door. They didn't seem very thick, so to be able to get the hardware embedded in those might be a challenge. I'm not saying it can't be done, I'm just suspicious.
Yeah, and we're trying to keep the historic nature of the architecture as much as possible. It's a 1935 building. And I do appreciate your maintaining that historic on the east side. That was really important. So if we have to compromise on the door, at least the east side, which has the street exposure and the most exposure.
Well, I think
is
we can
good.
make those doors on the backside look exactly like you want them to look.
Even with metal, that's,
No, we won't do them out
oh,
of,
you wouldn't do them out of metal?
if you don't want them out of metal. Quite frankly, a metal door can be painted to look pretty similar to wood, but doesn't have to be. They could be done out of wood. That's not a problem.
Oh, okay, I misunderstood.
Now, they could be done out of wood to look exactly like the doors you have. I just don't know if we can reuse those exact doors and be able to fit all the hardware.
And we need that push,
Yep,
push.
yep, you'll need the
pad thing.
push button
Okay,
actuator
okay.
and then, you know, the hinges
Sure.
and the operator at the top. So all that requires quite a bit of modification to the doors.
Okay.
So that's my only concern. And like I said, it's just not my area of expertise. I'm a
Sure,
landscape
sure.
architect. I deal with a lot of these kind of projects, so I know enough to be dangerous. And I have suspicions, but I can't tell you definitively.
Well, thank you very
Confirm
much.
or deny.
Yes, exactly.
So we go with the one restroom option, can we, or is it open for the second one, if we change our mind and say, well, a little higher demand here?
No, I don't think you're precluding any options. At that point, you might just literally be giving up a little bit of economy of scale of having a plumber in there once, and a painter in there once, and a tile person in there once, or whatever the flooring's gonna be, you know what I mean? But no, I don't think there's anything that precludes that. I think that side could stay either as is, or be decommissioned, however you choose to deal with it. And so certainly it could happen in the future.
I was wondering if we could rough in the second one too.
What was that, Mike?
I was wondering if we could rough in the plumbing and stuff on that second one too, in case there was needed to expand.
Well, that would be a good idea when they're really getting in there and doing the major structural work. If at least those stubbings were over there and capped off, that's probably a pretty good idea.
There would definitely be times during the year, 2 restrooms would be nice. If we did 2 of them, we might not unlock them both all year round, but I know there'd be times where 2 would be helpful, but we would get by with 1. And just so you know, that wall in between the 2 restrooms is the river rock. It's a concrete wall in between those 2. So unless you wanted to knock that down and make one big one, I would keep that river rock wall in between.
Yeah, we talked about that when Vicki, you and Barbara and I met, and what, it was a $10,000 difference to do 2 versus 25 for 1, and then coming back and having the hassle and, you know, to get it finished. I don't know, I personally think do it right the first time, when there are funerals and things, sometimes you need that capacity. Yeah.
Other questions about either of these?
Vicki, you're awful quiet. Do you have any thoughts to share with us?
I just have a spelling correction to make. It says on here it's a southeast door, but it's a southwest door that
Right.
we're talking about. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, other than that. No, I agree with the 2 bathrooms. I think that's, do it right, because the building is, the River Rock, it's historic. You're gonna have to do windows and such in it anyway. And if we can get the doors, those carriage doors to be wood and handicapped accessible, that's great. That's great.
You'd mentioned that we wouldn't see a 50% reduction in cost of the one restroom versus 2. Is it a 10%, 30%? You got a wild guess?
My guess is you're gonna pay 60% of the overall cost to do one, just based on the things that you would have paid, you know, some of those rough ends, you're tearing stuff out, you know, that would be my guess. There's just, there are some of those things that, you know, it's the act of digging the ground up once that, you know, a lot of the cost is in that, and then adding a little pipe to go over to the next side is the cheap part, you know what I mean? So you're just not getting all the value out of that if you do them in 2 halves. But, you know,
You
there's reasons that you
You
might
could
choose.
rough it into the point where all you need to do is just put the stool, the toilet in, and then the sink in. You can go that route, but.
I think that's a really good idea, because I think what you do is you go in and tear out those floors, and then you would run underneath the rock, and then, you know, you could just stub up on the non-finished side, cap them off,
Right.
and then you would finish the other side and pour the floor, and, you know, on the second side, you probably wouldn't need to tear up the whole floor, you might just tear out the back part, have your stubs come up there, and then you could choose to pour it back in or just leave it uncapped, because, you know, when you come to do the rest, you're probably gonna have to tear it out anyway to get drains where they need to be and all that sort of stuff, so it might not make sense to really even fill it in at that point until it becomes an actual restroom.
And just to be clear, the wall that is stone is the divider between the 2 rooms,
Yep.
not the proposed stub walls that you have for more discretion, if you will, between the 2 areas of the bathroom. The water
Yeah,
closet room.
that's really not a stub wall, we're showing, pardon me.
I guess it's a whole.
Those are just partitions, you know, they're standard toilet
Like
partitions.
metal.
Privacy
Yeah.
partition.
Okay.
Metal
I see.
or solid surfacing, one of the more durable ones that
Sure.
you would use in a public restroom.
Graffiti resistant, of course.
Yeah, so you either see the stainless steel that can be, you know, pretty much cleaned, or sometimes you'll see solid surfacing, because then it can just be buffed out. And then, you know, everything underneath it's the same color, and so those are the 2 systems that you'll see in public restrooms. The solid surfacing is a little less expensive. The nice thing about that is it doesn't look like a jail. You know, if you get everything 2 stainless steel in there, it's bulletproof, but it also is not necessarily always the most friendly. So, those are some of the.
If we only made one restroom handicap accessible, we'd save probably, I'm guessing, $5,000 for the door opening. I forget what they're called.
For the door opener?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's, I mean, there's definitely some savings to be had on that side, you know, so, and you can choose to do
So
that.
both doors would have to be automatic, or just
Oh.
the handicap accessible one?
No, quite frankly, we could make one restroom accessible, this one could then just be a second family restroom, would not have to have an opener.
Wouldn't have to have an actuator.
No.
And the actuators, I know what they cost, they're $3,000 at least,
Yeah.
so.
So, you know, yeah, definitely this side next to the handicap parking stall would be your accessible one, and this one would not need to be accessible. Could just be another family restroom.
That'd be my direction.
Right.
$5,000 more to do it right.
You need both of them.
Yeah. Not handicap on both of them, but
No, but just to have 2 bathrooms.
get her in.
Yeah.
Right.
That part.
I just figured out 40%, about $5,000 from what you're looking at, minus the handicap.
And there really are more people than just like on Memorial Day. There are a lot of walkers out there, and sometimes the maintenance people out there use those restrooms, so it's, it's used more than just on special occasions.
Yeah, when they're out there mowing, they can be out there for a couple of days going around miles. Yeah.
3.5 days for us to
3.5
get
days.
from the north to the south. Usually about Thursday, about 2 o'clock, they're done.
That includes trimming.
No, that's just mowing. And
That's just
then
mowing,
another
yeah.
trimmer.
So that's probably once a week, it's parts of the season, right?
Yep. That's 2 mowers in one the whole time.
2 people to mow,
Yeah,
it's still 3 days.
3.5.
I thought it was just one, holy.
No.
That's,
No.
yeah.
We use 60-inch mowers because there's a lot more
Yeah.
narrow areas. There's places we get out and hand mow. You just can't get mowers.
I mean, it always looks beautiful out there, I know.
Yeah.
You use your discharge to keep clippings off the stones, and it's really done well.
Any other questions for Craig or Jack?
So again, this was just a presentation. If there's changes you want Craig to make, let us know. Otherwise, upcoming budget, we'll get some more definite numbers, and then you can decide if you wanna make that.
We can let you know the changes and you can let Craig know. How's that?
So, in the drawing you saw, we've already modified that based on some of Jack's input, and I was out there today, saw a few more things. We'll get that cleaned up along with the typo on southeast versus southwest,
That was my fault. That was on my memo.
and we will, all right.
Yeah, you didn't do it, Craig.
And we'll show, and I'll also look into the issue of whether we can reuse those doors. If we
Yeah.
can't, then I've got enough photos of them that we would replicate them in wood doors that would look like that, but can meet the standards for the accessibility.
Is there a place where you could repurpose those doors, Vicki, if you
Yeah.
needed to?
We commissioned Nate Nagel to build those specially for
I
that, so,
remember,
Yeah, they look like the original.
Dory.
They're just
Yeah.
beautiful.
You know, one of the things we might be able to do is, we might be able, even if we can't reuse them directly, what we could do is get maybe more of a plain door, and then skin them with, with that door on the outside. So essentially, it kind of becomes a faux door on the outside, so,
Well, let me put this to you, Craig, we know the guy that built those. If you have the technical specifications of what they need,
I wonder.
why could we not just use him to redo it again?
Maybe so, it might just be beefing up the stiles, the
Right.
rails and stiles, so we can look at that.
Well, they could
Like I
even
said, I'm
core out
just
the
not an
door, if they
expert.
need a metal rod on the inside, they could core that out, put the metal for the containment of
So,
those handles that are pulling.
Most of the time when we see doors that are used with openers, they're probably a 2-inch door. I mean, they're stout, and I wasn't able to open those doors, so I couldn't get a sense of the thickness, but I got the impression that they were more inchish, but I don't know that to be the case. So a lot of times it's just a plain thickness issue. Do we have enough material that you can embed the kind of hinges and, all the stuff that needs to be on there? So, but like I said, I'll talk to an actual expert and I'll get you an answer.
But we know the guy that actually made the doors,
Yeah.
and we could probably, I bet he would be happy to do it again.
Well, and maybe it's
Do it
just, like,
correctly.
maybe they're just, like I said, you rework those and beef them up
Yeah.
enough, so that's actually a great idea.
Okay. Thanks.
We can look at that.
So you need a motion to approve the current cemetery building improvements with more information to follow. Okay. I'll
Is
need
that
a,
what we need, or do we just need this back to find a little more?
See the report.
Yeah.
what would you like? Just receive, okay, a motion to receive the report.
So moved to receive the report.
There's a motion and a second. If there's no other discussion, we'll go ahead and vote, please.
Base? Seaman?
Yes.
Fleshner?
Yes.
Jerks?
Yes.
Haley?
Yes.
Cox?
Yes.
Motion approved.
Thank you. The next item is the Graham Park Master Plan presentation, and Jack, please.
Thank you, Mayor. This plan originated back when we had the Iowa State school helping us with some preliminary, some drawings, objectives that we had down in that area. They weren't anything like, we got Chad Hattery to detail for us further than the Iowa State study. It was great. Iowa State does a great study to get us started, get us moving, get things excited down there at Grant Park. And then we acquired Chad Hattery to come up with a Grant Park master plan. It's broke down, and Craig will go into a lot more detail. It's broke up into the 4 projects. I won't read each one of them, but they do have dollar amounts. With a grand total cost of $3,659,600. Those are estimates, probable costs. So at this point, I would turn it again over to Craig and have him go over the plan.
All right, thank you again. So as Jack mentioned, what we were charged to do was to take the original study done by the Iowa State Community Design Laboratory. That was really a visioning exercise to talk about what could happen in this region, both sides of Grant Road there, both Grant Park and then between the stadiums. And our charge was really to try to put a little bit of feasibility to that in terms of some reality. Certainly the students did a great job creating a vision. What we were trying to do was really look at that in more detail, figure out what pieces of it were actually implementable, and then bring that back to you in a way that it could feed into your capital improvement planning. So Jack mentioned there are 4 projects here. That's just the way we organized it. In fact, what we have given you is essentially an a la carte kind of menu of different improvements that were included within the plan. The reason we put it into 4 different quote-unquote projects was just so people could understand it. Here are the things that happen in Graham Park. Here are the things that happen along the Grant Road streetscape. Here are the things that happen in the creek area, and here are the things that happen around the stadiums. So it's really more of an organizational issue. The $3.6 million, that is if you went in and did everything. Certainly you're never going to do all that. You're going to make priorities over time based on the realities of the day, and certainly you folks sitting here may have a lot to do with that. Other things can come forward. Need for infrastructure protection. It's a great example where some things that we show in the creek for improvements someday may be more urgent based on the tennis courts starting to sink and needing a wall in there, or utility structures starting to fall in, those kinds of things. So, there are a lot of choices you'll make in terms of how this money actually gets spent and when and how much of it. What we're trying to do is give you a tool that then your staff, that Jack and Mike, can start to plug into your capital improvement plans based on the priorities that you create, and those start to get then plugged in future years. What they can then do is take the cost estimates that we've done. If there are individual line items, they can take those out, kind of take them times the multiplier that we have down at the bottom, and then you can project them into future years. We typically use a 2 to 3% inflation rate for future construction years, and that tracks fairly well with what we've seen in Iowa. So that's the way the tool would be used, and so I'm just going to kind of run you through what we've included and give you an overview of the costs. Once again, there's a lot of these things will be very familiar. We did use the priorities that the students set, and a lot of the issues, and I'll mention those as we go forward. So this just explains the 4 project areas. We have the Graham Park. We treated the creek area separately, Grant Road streetscape, and then the stadium, parking, and plaza are the 4 areas we broke it into. Those are the overall numbers. We probably won't focus on those yet. Let's maybe start with talking about what's in the individual projects. So this is the Graham Park improvements. The big ticket items that we're looking at in the park is park signage. So the plan called for kind of unifying the park signage style that we see out there with themes that tie to the stone that we've just talked about at the cemetery. That also makes an appearance in this corridor. We talked about restroom improvements, same sort of issue we're talking about the cemetery. There are 2 standalone older restrooms and then one here in this shelter, none of which are handicap accessible. So, how do we deal with those moving forward? So there's some thought in the report that deals with that. Another major theme that came out of this was playground improvements, bringing in new equipment and then also providing sort of nature play elements. So we've put some thought and some numbers to that. Another major piece of the Graham Park puzzle was parking improvements. The parking works okay out there right now, but there's some concerns about what happens when there's a football game or other event at the stadium that, can it be more efficient? Can we get more cars in there? So we did some studies in terms of paving those areas and striping them to try to maximize the amount of parking you can get in the park. Lighting improvements throughout the park. One of the themes that came forward was just kind of upgrading the lighting in general, getting rid of some of the old lighting and then coming back with new LED lighting. We did hear that there was a desire to use same fixture that you've used throughout your downtown, at least in the feature areas of the park. I think there might be some other areas where you choose to, like parking lots, maybe that gets lit by a more utilitarian fixture, but then, as you're along the paths and the more pedestrian areas, that would be an upgraded fixture. And so those are the main themes that we looked at through the park there. And then we went in and we, costed all those, and you can see when we add all the paving improvements and all the other improvements there in the park, we have a cost of about $860,000. Like I said, that's all in. Certainly you will make choices to do those over time, and you'll prioritize different pieces of that. Big numbers are in the paving and the parking improvements. Project 2 is the creek stabilization project and creek improvements. If you recall the ISU report, it was very ambitious in terms of making a lot of contact areas, ways for people to get down to the creek, interpretive areas. One of the things that we found in studying it, well, 2 things we found in studying it, a lot of those concepts were going to require pulling the slopes back quite a bit, and there is a major sanitary sewer line that runs through there that is not going to allow a lot of that to happen. Number 2, in this short of a stretch, having that many different interaction areas really was not very cost effective. And number 3, in talking with staff, we found that a lot of the concerns here are really about stability. That stream is cutting, there are a lot of storm sewer outfalls that are kind of falling in. Jack did mention that there's some concerns about what happens with the tennis courts up there. They're awfully close. How do we protect those? The major improvements that we looked at here was to add a structural wing wall coming off of the box culvert at the north to protect your investment in your tennis courts. Right now there's some sort of makeshift, I think they're timber and some rubble walls there that probably need to be upgraded. Protection of existing infrastructure, so that's coming in, making improvements along the creek to guard the cutting and keep it from going deeper, and then doing outfall protection and reconstruction of some of the sewer outlets. We did keep down here towards the south by the shelter down here, there is an opportunity for an access and a creek experience. So we are showing the idea that we would pull the creek back a little bit there, provide a trail that goes down to it, and you could actually get to the creek and experience the water there. So there is one area where we did that. And then the other thing in this component is a continuous trail along the west side of the creek. So that's what's included in this quote-unquote project.
That's still stormwater that goes down through there.
It is still stormwater, yeah,
Okay.
So, yep, that's a major stormwater route, heading south. And as you can tell from the condition of it, there are times when it moves a lot of water. So,
I can tell you, project two, this would be a great REAP grant application for the entire, you can fund up to $125,000. I know in the past, we've always done the trails, and out of 4 REAP grants, I think we applied, we got it once. We were one of the low ones. This would be right down their alley, it'd be probably funded.
Some of the landscaping and stuff, I think, could definitely be improved down there.
Yeah.
there are also some urban watershed monies that are available that help with, they're meant specifically for these kinds of storm improvements in urban areas. And we do have a water resources group that does a lot of this kind of work. They actually did all this preliminary planning. It can certainly help you identify some of those funding sources. So.
Could they make a little bit of a rock bed for that, so it doesn't cut through it so much anymore?
So
you could
yeah,
retard some of the loss of soil?
yeah. Well, that's a great question. So there's a lot of technologies that they'll use to stabilize that creek bed. Number one is they will analyze how deeply incised the creek is and how steep it is. And one of the things that they do is they basically just come and put little check dams in, little rock riffle check dams that essentially take the steepness out. They slow the water down, and they deal with some of that cutting issue.
Okay.
The other piece is there are a lot of vegetative strategies that can be dealt with in terms of plants that can be put in there that will hold it better. Certainly the best defense wherever you can do it is stepping those slopes back, but as you know from driving along there, there's really no way to do that on the east side because you're hard up against the road, and then we have the sewer issue on the west side, so wherever that could happen a little bit, that can help. And then, you know, last defense is just armoring some of these things. You know, that's historically been the way we've dealt with urban water. You know, water courses, you just go in and rip out the heck out of them. It's kind of not the current state of practice, looking at much more natural and environmentally friendly interventions. So those are all a possibility. So that's that. Any other questions about this project?
Should we be looking at the tennis courts situation sooner? Is that an issue, or?
Well, I don't know how much, so it was pointed out that there's a potential issue there and wanting to provide some protection for that. How much movement are you actually seeing?
I haven't seen a lot, I don't know if you've seen any, right? No.
Yeah.
I think initially after the courts were built, there was a little work done in that corner, but it's been stable, I guess, otherwise.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Over time, it'll probably change.
So there's not a fire, it's just a matter of if we're going to be improving it, we improve it the right way, so it's
Right.
good for the future.
Right, good.
Yep. Any other questions on that before we move forward? All right, there are the costs on that. You know, that's coming in at about $130,000. As Jack said, those kinds of improvements are ones that there are more grant funds available for. So a lot of cities are going after these sort of urban watershed projects. I know you've all probably tracked with this idea of, you know, how are we going to deal with water quality in Iowa, some of the actions that the legislature has been talking about that have fizzled and have come back around. A lot of cities are getting their plans in place, so when that money starts flowing, that you know that you essentially have your planning done and you're going to score better on some of those grants. So it's something to consider.
This project, Craig, could probably be taken in of itself. You could probably do this one as a solitary project.
And that's really the way it makes sense.
So if you got the grant, you could probably get that done, and you got one of them done.
Because
Okay.
if you're going to mobilize a contractor to get in there and mess around in that creek, you might as well just get it
done.
Get it done.
Get the whole thing
And you
done at
can
once.
see from the estimate, it's not a huge number. You know, it's very doable in a bite-sized chunk. You know,
Okay.
so yeah, very, very good thinking. You know, and in this whole process, there probably needs to be some thinking about what happens upstream and downstream. I'm not suggesting that you want to bite off a lot more, but certainly that needs to be considered if you do make that investment, just to make sure you're protecting it. Streams being very dynamic creatures, environments, ecosystems, certainly understanding what's happening up and down is very important in any given project, so. The third major chunk of work that was included in the report, the ISU report, was just improvements to Grant Road. And those primarily had to do with a few things. Number one was the idea of providing a continuous 8-foot trail along the east side of the road there. Certainly not without issues. There's utility poles and a lot of stuff to be gone around. But probably doable, you know, it may have to wiggle around a little bit. So that's one piece. Another piece that was called out in the plan was consistent street trees on both sides. There's quite a few trees out there on the east side, some in good shape, some in not. West side. East side less so, but that could be reinforced. So that's something to look at. Pedestrian activated crossings, there's actually two. We kind of pointed one out to show where that one is, but there would actually be two, and they would essentially align with the existing pedestrian bridges. The one on the south obviously connects to the stadium, the one on the north connecting to DMAC. And so those are pedestrian actuated signals that you push the button and you know they have the flashing lights, so it's not a full signal, it's just lights on either side and a painted crosswalk to help with some of the crossing issues there, and we've included two of them.
Hey, Brad, so for something along that line, if you had one of those and that light's flashing, the traffic then has to yield?
Should yield, yes.
It should yield, so that would at least slow that down so the people in the crosswalk can go.
Hopefully.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
That's the intent, I know, yeah, okay.
technically, those are signed that says stop for pedestrians and crosswalks.
Crosswalks, okay.
when they're going. So that's the idea. We could talk about how that might be managed in football games. There was some discussion about even a desire, could you shut Grant Road down in a football game? I think our traffic folks had some concerns about your public safety issues relative to that. And, you know, so maybe it's having a staff person and then with the walk lights being able to control it. Hold
We have
people.
the volunteer firemen take care of that for us on game nights.
Yep.
So.
And that would give them an additional tool to be able
Yeah.
to do that, so. And then the final issue is just, once again, this idea of consistent signage. So as you kind of enter the district on the north, maybe having signs to talk about that, and then enter the district on the south as well. So, you know, kind of signage on either end that just denotes the Grant Road corridor there. Consistent with what we saw in the plan. And then that's the cost estimate on that. That one is $940,000. The big numbers in here are the trail paving and then the pedestrian crossings. You know, the trail paving to take the existing 4-foot walkout, realign an 8-foot trail through there. That's one of the big numbers. And then the pedestrian crossings are about $100,000 a piece. They're not cheap, but relative to traffic signals, where that might be $250,000 to $500,000 for full signals, they're more cost effective. So, and then the other thing is a roadway lighting upgrade, so consistent light fixtures along there. So that's the other big number in that one. So.
And some of the property owners in those three areas by the rec center, DMAC, and the school, I know one is really interested in seeing that and would try to participate with us on the trail part.
Hey, Randy, for like some of the streetscape projects, could we run streetlights down Grant Road on the?
Streetscape 13.
Yeah. Could we run streetlights down the, I think it was 12th Street, 11th Street?
I don't
On
think
the
it's
west-
all in your TIF district.
No, oh, that's true,
But you
okay.
can run them, but the
Yeah.
financing,
The financing part, yeah,
there may be a portion of it in the TIF.
okay.
You have to look.
And you may be able to expand to one of the differences between our legacy TIF district and doing expansion is a limited period of time,
Right.
where the original TIF district doesn't expire. So you would have to coordinate timing on when you do that expansion, on when funding will be available.
Available, right. so that could be a project to look at, to run the, maybe some of those streetscape lights that we're using now up Grant Road, up to say 11th Street.
I have a question quick for David. David, too, when you consider amenities within a park, amenities that are typically considered a part of any park area, that falls into essential corporate purpose, right? So we could bond over the over 700,000
I think you're right.
for considering those are essential corporate purposes?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
May I ask a question? Does,
Yeah.
does the streetscape include redoing those bridges? Those are historic bridges, the stone bridges.
Yeah, no, that would be a separate, that would be with the Graham Park project.
Okay.
Yeah, the streetscape project that just came to mind, we're running, people on streetlights up there, I'm like, okay, would that be feasible, but those
Because it's $100,000
bridges,
for pedestrian crossings.
yeah, right, but
I
then
think the idea would be to try to keep those bridges as much as we can. You know, there's probably some issues with them that we probably need to address, but the stone that connects both of them, keep that,
right,
you know, that type of walkway, but my concerns are the sides.
So in the creek project, we included some costs for essentially armoring around the abutments of those bridges to make sure that they stay in place. The one thing we did, I would agree with Jack, the one thing I think you at some point might want to address is the railing systems that really just don't meet any modern standards in terms of guardrails. And you know, certainly they're historic and that's an issue, how you deal with it. On other historic bridges, you know, you can leave the existing rails and maybe put an infill panel in there that essentially makes them compliant without, you know, so you still see the swoop of I think those are basically reinforcement rod that was welded together, you know, and now has become historic in its nature.
well, it's certainly ancient,
Yeah, so, you know, we just did a pedestrian bridge for the city of Winterset. It's an old historic arch bridge, and, you know, so we didn't alter the character of that. We essentially floated a railing system inside the historic arches, so you kind of maintain the exterior look of the bridge, and then you put a railing system in that's sensitive to the design of the structure. And in that case, we actually did something artistic with it, so it now became an experience as you go along the trail. You know, you still have the historic structure and then kind of an art exhibit along the railings. So those are all possibilities. We left it out of this study. It wasn't in the scope, and we had discussed it, but just decided that was a bit of a loaded issue with all the history. But it's good that it came up. It's probably something to just be aware of.
because if we're gonna do something with parking over there with the expectation that that's gonna be football stadium parking, that those things are still gonna be used, and so we wanna keep them safe too. So,
Yeah, yes, by all means, you know, and so we could, while the plans don't show it now, we could give you basically a budgeting cost, kind of a lineal foot to update railings, if you'd like that added to the plan, just so you see that reflected, we could definitely do that.
I'd like transparency to that, so we know what we've got and keeping them.
Yeah, I think that's wise, so. We can definitely give you, you know, like I said, we've just done a project, so we have good costs on that, we can give you an update on that, so. All right, moving forward, the final chunk that was broken out is the area that, you know, comes between the football stadium, the rec center, and then started to incorporate the large parking areas around the baseball stadium and between the football stadium. If you remember in the original ISU report, they fairly aggressively had a very large green area in there. Essentially, this entire piece that I'm holding my hand over right now was all seen as like a lawn and plazas. And in working through the user groups, the stakeholder groups that we talked with, there were some fairly serious concerns that came forward about that plan.
The first of which was loss of parking. The second one was loss of snow storage area, as those are places that you truck snow to during the winter. The third was the expense of creating that kind of a green infrastructure and what it would really be used for when you have the entire Graham Park right across the road. So the idea that you would need multiple event spaces within a block of each other and how that would really get used. There were concerns that way. Another concern was by DMAC, they need to be able to get truck traffic through here. Final concern was well, maybe not the final, but the last one I can remember was how you drop off the football games, trying to get some of that away from here, because this is going to be a mess. You can see it, you know, I was out there today and they had a track meet going on and they were going to start some sort of a soccer game, and it was a mess. You know, this parking lot was already full and people were going in and out, and you know, there was barely anybody there yet. So that Jack had also mentioned, you know, we're showing it here. Obviously, you're kind of in the heart of this right now, designing your expansion to the rec center. The idea of your 24-hour fitness center in here, the need for parking there. So there were just quite a few things that maybe were at odds with the ISU study. So we went through quite a few iterations and we came up with this plan. And what it does is it essentially leaves green space in here, creates a smaller drop-off plaza and green space, connects, you know, pedestrians from Graham Park all the way through to this area and then up to the baseball stadium, but it maintains your circulation through, it maintains a drop-off circulation, maintains this area for snow storage. We are showing, per the recommendations of the original study, bioswales in there. That is that snow melts, it goes into the bioswales, and promotes cleaning of that water. You take out the salts and some of the sediments and the sand. And then that water is released to the creek ultimately. What we're showing here is the idea that this becomes a pedestrian connection, but one of the issues we were asked about was, okay, there's a loading dock on the rec center there, and that's where they move in shows when they have theatrical performances. So the solution to that is we're actually just going to thicken this walk enough that in those few instances you could pull a truck into here, back it down, and then we're showing the idea that you would add a small little exterior loading dock lug to that door so you could kind of swing it around. And I'll show you an image of that here later so you can understand that. You know, we did try to provide, keep as much of this prime parking up front. The baseball folks were really interested in maintaining that because that's where most of their people park when they come. And then, you know, as we go north, you now have, after the stadium project is done, if you go out there now, you'll see that, you know, essentially it comes to the fence and then it's just asphalt, no man's land from fence to fence. It's actually not wide enough to get 2 lines of parking in there now. So essentially you have a bunch of asphalt and only enough space for a row and a half of parking, and you can't really circulate that second half. So what we're showing is the idea that part of that would come out of the asphalt and go into green, then you could get trees along both sides and a sidewalk, and then one well-ordered piece of parking and lane in between that cleans all that up. So that's what's happening there. So that in general is the concept. Like I said, trying to keep the spirit of it, but pull it back into a doable component. And you can see that's really a big cost driver with all the paving modifications that we're talking about in terms of parking lots and storm sewers and bioswales and truck dock improvements. And that one comes out to about $1.1 million as you add all those up. Like I said, a lot of the numbers there are in paving is where those go. So here's some views. This is a view, aerial view, showing obviously baseball stadium, football stadium, rec center addition, how you would come in. You can kind of circulate and drop off there. This would be that 24-hour rec center parking. That's the pedestrian route over to Graham Park. And this is the little drop-off plaza and entry for the football stadium. That's a little closer view of that area, just showing how that would work. So, you know, if I'm coming to drop off kids, I can come in here, turn here, drop them off there, and go out. So they don't have to come all, circulate all through the site. They can come in and go out the same way. And that's that plaza, that's kind of showing the green space around that plaza. So essentially just providing enough of a little event area there that you could wait or have a small event, those kinds of things as you're getting ready. And really trying to encourage more use of that parking on the east side as opposed to in Graham Park. That was one of the things that we were very surprised by as we went through this process. You know, you've got all this parking over there, and in the first meeting we talked to folks who were like, yeah, nobody uses it, they're all over in the park. And then they explained how the stadium's flipped and the home side's on the west and how people use that. And so just trying to create a little bit more of an attraction. Certainly it's dependent on their willingness to play along on that issue. I think you could do the same concept and not create that drop off there. That could be essentially whatever they want it to be. But you know, the parking lots could work the same, and that could work the same. Hopefully, that's a place where you can collaborate. I know that maybe that didn't go exactly the way the city would like in the construction in terms of enough conversation back and forth.
But it cleans it up though. It makes it look a lot better than what was in there.
Well, you would hope that they would be a willing partner in that, and that it, you know, like you said, it cleans it up for everybody.
How many parking spots are in that configuration there, do you know?
Let me find my report, and I can tell you, unless somebody already has it in front of them.
I couldn't find it through here, but.
How much is it, about the same as what's in there?
There's an actual parking analysis page in
It
there.
was like about 1,692, I think.
Parking spots?
What was that? It was, maybe it was total. Do you remember, Barry?
I don't.
We had it in one of those reports though.
Yeah, looking at it, it looks like
Cool.
almost the same.
Well, see, they took out a whole row of parking there, 2 rows.
So,
Center.
somehow that parking
Is it real
analysis,
long then? No.
Yeah.
There's only 2 down there now.
yeah,
You can park on, you can park.
You don't see anybody parking where they're free?
You
So-
could,
Huh?
you could.
Yeah.
I know for a fact,
I don't think you're losing any down here.
yeah,
We said
I,
we're not.
our library.
Yeah.
I don't know, I just saw
I don't see
quantity,
hardly
the
losing
pricing
hardly
of the
any
parking,
at all.
That's square yards, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I don't have that in front of me, but I can get you that answer. What I can tell you is that in this version, we're maintaining several hundred more parking stalls than the original.
There was more than what the ISU had.
Quite
Yeah.
substantially
You're adding
more.
some good parking in Graham.
Yeah.
Is that counting Graham
That
Park?
doesn't count Graham. Graham,
you
I
have
think we netted out 40, 50 additional stalls versus.
And that's just by marking them.
That's by, well, it's both marking them, but also expanding a few areas. I don't have it, but we essentially, there were a few areas that we just made a little bit larger. And I actually have this on disc, but I can bore everybody by pulling it up, but we
I
can
know
get
in
you.
some of the early discussions with that committee, with Adam, we had how many parking stalls were there and how many there was to take out.
And we actually did the analysis,
Something.
for some reason it just didn't make it into the summary. So it might be in the appendix at this point.
Okay.
Well, and for sure, the comparison of existing versus proposed.
Yeah, we can get you that, we've got those numbers. But like I said, we did, like, my recollection is we're netting out about 40 more in Graham Park, and then we reduced the loss in the stadium area here by well over 100 spots, is my recollection.
Because
'Cause
they
it
want
was,
this big
yeah,
green space in
yeah,
there.
essentially they had
That'd be a lot of
taken that many
resistance.
spots out of use, so it's everything that you see in there.
Jack, one time we were talking earlier in this about putting a parking spot across from the entrance of the aquatic center.
Mhm.
Is that gone, it's talking now?
That was not included in their study.
Okay.
And I have the ISU study up, I was trying to get the, I wanna say it was like 750 between redoing the rec center, baseball stadium, football field, and then including Grant Park, that little section east of DMAC building, that area there.
Yeah, they had
Yeah.
proposed, to offset all that parking loss, they had proposed building a fairly substantial new parking lot just outside of the aquatic center.
I know I was on the original thing on this with Barry, and then, as soon as it came out, we hit a lot of resistance on parking behind the stadium right away. And this looks a lot better.
Yeah, we tried to strike a balance, keeping some of the themes that they had and getting some pedestrian areas, but knowing that they probably had not gotten the original mix right on parking versus green space.
Existing right now on the east side is 677 spots. West side Grant Park, they said 168.
692. That's, yeah. That was like 4 or 5 years ago, I did
Yeah.
discussion.
Yeah, we do have those, we'll get you that information, we did do the calculations.
That's counting the, obviously it is, the ones that go over toward the slow pitch.
Here, yes.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
counting that, right.
And there, we didn't really lose a lot there, because that paving is actually overly wide there, so we were able to cut in the bioswale and not lose a bunch of stalls there. So you're not necessarily, so you're basically maintaining all those stalls from there over.
I had to read about bioswales, I wasn't sure about that when I saw that, and now it makes better sense.
Yeah, so the bioswales are places to temporarily store the water, infiltrate them into the ground, and what they really do is they help us filter the water. In those parking lots, when you're bringing all that snow off your paved surfaces, it's full of sand, it's full of salt, it's full of a lot of stuff that you don't really want to put into the creek. So that allows it to go into there, and then the plants help treat some of that. Eventually, bioswales do have to be mucked out, because if you have enough sand in there, they will fill out. So in 20 years, you probably have to come muck some of that stuff out. It'll usually be land applied someplace, and then you replant them. So they show up in a lot of plans. They don't get built a lot. I'll be honest about that. They're very good things to have, and as stormwater regulations continue to get more stringent, and meeting your permit requirements gets more difficult, you're going to have to look at more of those kinds of strategies.
I was just concerned more about getting the trucks in and out and through there.
Yeah, we actually studied, we put some major islands, and we studied this movement through, and we added, kind of end circulation islands. So we did give up some stalls there to allow allow trucks to get through. So we did study that.
And I think there's a lot of drop off for practices and stuff at the adult softball complex too, so.
Yeah, agreed.
I'll be able to
And
wrap
that
in.
kind of has that natural circulation, then they can come in, drop and come back out. So we did look at that. And I think, there's also some drop-off activities in addition at DMAC that we had talked about. So I think we got all those covered, basically.
Has anybody talked about discussion like with Van Day, all the bus activity, bus parking that goes on in those lots? Has that ever been brought up?
I think it'd be okay.
Should be, but I just want to make sure it's considered.
Sure.
So relative to bus parking, the only time we really have a difficulty is that if both the lot's full and you have a bunch of buses. Usually, if you have something going on here and this isn't full, you just park them, kind of along the back edges, and you can usually get quite a few buses that way. The place where we have a real problem is if all the parking's maxed out and you have a bunch of buses, which I guess I don't know what kind of events you have. If there is something that would happen, then you might have to have them go off-site.
And there's probably 20 buses maybe? Not
Where does, like if they had now the track meets and stuff, where do those, you know,
Usually
they
park
bring the
in
buses
the
there?
slow pitch lot
They
there.
just-
Side.
On the
Oh,
east
that's on the
side.
side there.
Yeah.
I mean, you still would have the parking lot up by the pool
Yes.
and the softball complex there too.
The track's done when baseball starts, so
Right.
it doesn't, I don't think it's ever posed an issue.
As a past semi driver, I'm looking at this recreation center drop off. I think it's difficult to come in from the west where your drop off is.
I agree.
If you come in from the other side where you got that bigger parking lot for the semis to drive in, I think that would be really difficult to get a semi in these two little drop-off areas.
Certainly.
Yeah.
We
And
did,
then you're dealing with a lot of traffic out there where here you just don't have much.
so, you know, I think the
Yeah,
only,
exactly. You can avoid it by coming in from the east.
so we just need to think in that walk the entire
Yeah.
distance then. And you can certainly do it that way. That works. Other questions? I've taken a lot of your time. I'm starting to feel guilty. I know you all have things, other things you probably need to be doing. So the big thing I heard, two big things I heard was some information on railing systems and then parking counts. Those were kind of the two outstanding bits of information that we want to get to you, at least on this portion, and then there's a few things on the restroom and cemetery building. Okay?
Very good. Need a motion probably to set this report, unless there's any more discussion. I think that's what I would look for.
I would move to accept the report.
I'll second it.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any other discussion? Otherwise, we'll go ahead and vote, please.
Base? Yes. Fleshner?
Yes.
Haley?
Yes.
Seaman?
Yes.
Cots?
Yes.
Dirks?
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Thank you. Thanks, Craig.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate your time.
Yeah, by all means.
Our final report is the Carroll Public Library, Carroll City Hall project, change order number 4. And Mike, please.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. During construction at the library and City Hall sites, we had a few unexpected items during construction. Has prompted a need for a change order for, which was included in the packet. Some of the big items included adding flagpoles and making some electrical modifications for those. Additionally, making some modifications with the AV package. And then finally, we had some ductwork that we had to replace in the basement of the City Hall. Due to the asbestos removal, we had to remove that ductwork, and so now we're replacing it. Those are the big items in there. Proposed change order 4 does add 11 days to the contract for completion of City Hall and 4 days for the completion of the library portion of the project. The new completion date for City Hall is October 1st, and the library completion date is projected at December 19th. The original contract amount for the project was $4,526,100. The first 3 change orders increased that, or combined, was $172,144. This change order is $38,363. That brings the new contract amount to $4,736,607. The project itself did include a contingency of $362,088. With this 4th change order, if approved, our contingency remaining for the project will be $151,581. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions the council would have. We do recommend approval of change order number 4 in the amount of $38,363. Thank you.
And Mike, that first line, you got flagpole, electrical modifications at the library.
Yep.
And then you've got the light for the library is the last item. So,
What's
I
going
just
on
wanna make sure
there?
we're not doubling up on their saving.
We're not doubling up.
Okay.
The issue was, as we were looking at these as kind of sub-items, as we were working with the contractor, the exact light fixture that the architects originally looked at was not available. So we took that out, So the 590,000 basically includes running electricity to it, but does not include the fixture itself. And so that's where you see the fixture of 1,542.
Light fixture, we get $1,500.
It's a fixture that mounts to the pole itself.
I wanted to know about the flag poles that we're getting, this has gotta be phenomenal as well.
Well, flag poles, a commercial flag pole is
Yeah, that's-
expensive, go price one.
That one doesn't surprise me.
But, the fixture itself mounts on the pole itself. And talking with the architects, they believe it'll give us more durability long-term. What they're finding is the ones that are on the ground, they're either submerged in water and you have failures, or, they're on the ground and you get hit by a mower, where this is more protected.
Some of those ones that were in the ground, all of a sudden the glass starts to fog over after a while. Looks like it's got cataracts.
Glass is easy to cheap to replace.
Oh, no, I agree, yeah.
I was just thinking $1,500
$1
for
for a
light.
light.
A lot of money.
Maybe you better shine all the way to the moon.
At the Luxor Hotel out there. Any other questions for Mike? If not, I need a motion to approve the change order number 4 to the Carroll Public Library Carroll City Hall project in the amount of $38,363.
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. If there's no other discussion, we'll go ahead and vote, please.
Fleshner,
Yes.
Haley,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
Seaman,
Yes.
Base, Jerks.
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Thank you. I trust everyone's read the committee reports and the monthly activity reports. I have no comments this evening. Any comments from council? Any comments from the city manager? Otherwise, we will need a motion to go into closed session for the city manager annual review.
Yes, we are, with the caveat that Mike does need to request. So Mike will be here.
There is a motion to go into closed session, Iowa Code 21.51I. No other discussion, we'll go ahead and vote, please.
Base,
Yes.
What did you say?
Jerks.
Yes.
Fleshner,
Yes.
Haley,
Yes.
Yes.